Trigger warning. This podcast discusses themes centered around emotional, physical, and sexual violence. Listener discretion is advised. If you are struggling with any of the aforementioned issues, links to resources can be found in the show notes of today's episode. Live from Santa Monica, California, it is the show that is currently contemplating who is going to win this billionaire cage match and who will I put my money on. Elon versus Mark Zuckerberg. It is official. They're lining it up. Also, I have a special guest in the studio. Jodi Weber is joining us today to discuss True Crime Thursday and maybe even talk a little bit about this Natalia Grace documentary that has me so perplexed. Super excited. Mover Nation, what's going on? I'm your host, Collier Landry. This is Moving Past Trauma Live. Let's get into it.
Testimony continued today in the most notorious criminal trial in...
When I was 12 years old, my testimony sent my father to prison for murdering my mother. This podcast serves as a type of therapy and reconciliation for myself, and it is my hope that it helps anyone who has experienced deception, betrayal, and dark trauma. I'm Collier Landry, and this is Moving Past Trauma. Mover Nation, so excited to have all you here. Starting this episode actually on a solemn note, it has been we've all come to this conclusion that unfortunately the 5 crew members of the Titan OceanGate submarine submerged vessel, they believe that it has imploded underneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. It was on, for those of you who don't know, it was on a joyride expedition. I don't know what you would call it, but people had paid $250,000 to go on board this submarine vessel that was going down to look at the wreckage of the Titanic, 13,000 feet below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. It has been sort of the main topic of conversation in the last 96 hours around the world because many countries have been rushing to partake and help rescue these lost souls. And unfortunately, they have come to the conclusion, because the vessel would have run out of oxygen by now, that it most likely imploded a few hours after it submerged in its mission. So our hearts go out to the families and those who are reconciling with this. There's been a lot of speculation. I believe it was Cardi B that weighed in on the stepson of one of the billionaires, Hamish, I don't know his last name, Hamish Higgins or something like that, who was a British billionaire and part of one of the co-founders of this particular venture, OceanGate, who attended a Blink-182 concert, and people thought that he should be at home, dealing with the fact that his stepfather was missing. I don't know. Here's one of the things that we talk about on this program a lot, which is trauma related, obviously, is, people cope with trauma and traumatic events in their own unique way. And I personally think sitting and dwelling on something like that for, a while is not necessarily. I think that everyone reacts to things how they should and how they can cope and deal with the things. So another thing to keep in mind too, in discussing the trauma surrounding all this, is the tireless efforts of rescue workers involved with the U.S. Coast Guard, the U.S. Navy, the Canadian. There's French ships that came out because this happened about 400 miles off the coast of Newfoundland. So there were something like 25 vessels in the area, all actively participating in this search, along with rescue workers in the air using sonar capabilities to try to find these individuals. And they are also coming to terms with the fact that they were hoping for a positive outcome in all of this. And now they're having to reconcile what their experience is and going through all of that. So we got to keep that in mind when talking about all of this. But I want to bring on, praying for all those families and the victims who perished in this unfortunate incident. On that note, I want to bring in you guys loved her last week. She is the host of the Caught in My Web podcast on Patreon. Her name is Jodi Weber. She is a former FBI agent and journalist, and she is here to share what is going on in the world of true crime. I'm so honored to have her be a part of this program again. And let me bring her on.
Hi, Collier.
Hi, Jodi. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Good. Now we get to the point of the program where I put on my headphones.
All right. Very good. Very good. You're not going to sing at me, are you?
I'm not gonna sing that song that you wouldn't want me to sing.
Okay. Okay, good. It'd be the third time this week.
It would be the third
Not
time this
that I'm
week.
counting. Right.
Very true. Yes, you did text message me and said it's war. You sang that in the live yesterday.
I did. It's fighting words, Collier.
But as I shared with you, I am a much bigger fan of the Ray LaMontagne version, which
Yes, and I looked that up. Yes.
it's fantastic, right? It's also a whole different vibe because the first line of the song is cocaine. So it's a whole different vibe.
It's all about a drug addict. Yes.
Yes, it is.
I found that out.
Yes, it is.
You've educated me.
And the Pacific Northwest. Drug addiction, Pacific Northwest. Two things that sometimes seem to go hand in hand, unfortunately. But thank you so much for joining the program. I'm really hoping, that not only would you catch us up to what's going on in the world of true crime and what you're up to on your program, but also if you could explain to me this whole Natalia Grace thing, because
well, I'm covering
confused.
it tomorrow. I'm covering it tomorrow on Caught in My Web.
Okay.
Every Friday during the summer, we cover a different true crime documentary. And
Love it.
tomorrow it just so happens that the curious case of Natalia Grace is up. And I'll tell you, I found it very disturbing,
Yes.
that documentary, for multiple reasons. And for those who don't know, it's about a young girl or woman, which is debatable, who has the specific kind of dwarfism that this American family adopted when they were told she was 6 years old. Well, that soon came into question because in giving her a bath within the first few hours of having her, they discovered she had pubic hair and she had a period. So, 6-year-olds don't have that. So the question was, how old is she? And then after that, there were many, many questions about her mental behavior, her psychology. According to the family, she was very threatening to them, threatened them while they were sleeping. The mother alleged that she had poisoned her drink. The mother alleged she had tried to push her into an electric fence. And so you hear all these things. And according to the family, they are trying to get her some sort of psychological examination, some sort of diagnosis, some sort of gauge as to what her actual age may be. They tried to go back to the adoption agency, tried to go back to the family that had her prior to them to ascertain, what do you know? What information were you given? Because Natalia originally was born in the Ukraine. At least that is what we've all been told. So there were many, many questions from the jump. Well, as it goes on through this documentary, you find out that this family that adopted Natalia, they're not all they claim to be either. There's a lot of questions about their conduct and their behavior. When the docuseries starts, they are very proud of their family unit,
Yes.
their homes, their cars, their materialistic items, shall you say.
You talked about the Lamborghini in the driveway, and I'm just like, oh, you gotta be kidding.
Yeah, I almost turned it off the
cares?
first 2 minutes.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
he was so obnoxious, the
Ugh,
father.
Yeah.
And he's very dramatic, shall we say.
Yes.
And he paints this picture at the onset that they are just this all-American family. They have this loving marriage. They have this son who suffers from autism and is a prodigy and was a subject of 60 Minutes. And so within the first few minutes, I immediately just honed in on the fact that they like attention. They like money. They like material items. And I'm like, there's going to be some financial fraud in here somewhere. That was my instant instinct, is that, okay, did they adopt this young woman with special needs because they would be able to get some sort of disability funding through Social Security?
That was your thought?
That was my thought initially. And then certainly as the series goes on, you see that they claim that there's all these threats and that they don't feel safe with her and they're worried about their other children. And so ultimately what they do is they go to the court. And they go to a judge and they're able to convince a judge with the reports that they have from various doctors and therapists that Natalia most likely is not 6 years old, that she's much older than what they've been told. Well, the judge figures out through this convoluted formula that he believes she's much older. And I believe he made her 22. So therefore, because she was now legally an adult, according to this judge's decision, they were no longer financially responsible for her. So they put her into this apartment and basically go like this. Well, then that's where I really think we got the most objective view as to what Natalia's behavior was like, because we hear from the different residents of this apartment complex, and many of them had legitimate concerns about her and her behavior. And certainly she had some grooming issues, and you asked yourself, okay, is she mentally disturbed and that's why she doesn't groom, or is she physically not able to take care of herself because of her dwarfism, and does she have the special accommodations that she would need based on her height and that sort of thing? So there were a lot of questions about that, and you could see these neighbors really struggle. Like they felt sorry for her, but yet they were also on guard because she literally stalked some of them. And so there was one neighbor, and I told you about this the other night, that she came into the apartment of another neighbor and was kind of harassing her grandsons. And it was this Chihuahua who like scared Natalia and got the attention of an adult and said, "Hey, you don't belong in here." So after so many, nice product placement.
You like that product superhero
that was very
Chihuahua?
Smooth.
There we
smooth.
go.
Yes, here we go. I'll post mine too. So after all these complaints from all these neighbors, the leasing company was like, okay, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to evict you. You know, this is just, we can't have all these people making complaints. And there have been complaints about her propositioning in an inappropriate sexual manner some of the children in the area. So that was concerning as well. So then what this family does is they move her to another city, to another apartment on a second floor with multiple stairs, with, sinks and bathtubs and things she couldn't reach. And then they moved to Canada because their oldest son was in school there. And so there's a lot of questions as to, whether she's a child or not is one issue, but also, do they have an obligation just because she is a disabled person, a person with significant disabilities, physical disabilities, do they have a moral, ethical, and legal obligation to help her because she can't care for herself? So that really raised a lot of questions. And then as we find out, as this docuseries goes along, this family had a history of domestic violence.
Yeah.
The mother claimed that Natalia had tried to push her into an electronic fence. The witnesses at this farm where this alleged incident took place all said, no, it did not happen.
Yeah.
The oldest son said that he was forced to urinate on Natalia in her bed. The father claimed that the mother had been very abusive to Natalia, made her stand against a wall for hours at a time to the point where she would defecate on herself, and that she would be very physically abusive to her. The marriage disintegrated. The mother appeared to be quite prolific in her sexual activities online, and that seemed to really set the father off. And there appeared to be some alienation going on between the parents. And so while you question Natalia's mental health and what's going on with her, you also came away questioning the mental health of these parents and of this family. And I came away worried about these other children in that environment. So ultimately, they go to trial and he's acquitted. The father is acquitted of all four charges. And then the mother, they drop the charges. They don't even go to trial on her. So it was very disturbing in that I think it brings up the question of rehoming individuals with international adoptions. And that's kind of where these foreign adoptions come in, and you don't necessarily go through legitimate adoption services. And you wonder if the motivation of these people is simply so that they can collect disability payments, that sort of thing, because in this docuseries, you saw the father become very, very upset when some neighbors took custody of her and took her into their home, and then he was no longer allowed to collect that disability for her. So, it just really, really raises questions. And certainly recently in the Lori Vallow case, in the Harmony Montgomery case, we see a lot of situations where these children go missing and are killed, and the families that the perpetrators, they keep collecting these welfare and Social Security benefits.
Yes. Yeah. Especially with Lori Vallow. And it's, I think about situations like that where what is the disability that they're collecting? It can't be that much, right? And it ultimately seems that when they collect these payments, that leads to their eventual demise, right? But these people were very disturbing, and I had fallen asleep watching it last night, so I didn't get to see the Chihuahua save the day, even though that would have been the best part of all of this. But yeah, it is. It was really, really disturbing the way that right from jump, like you said, they're talking about money. It's like, we had over 300,000 in our bank account. I had a Lamborghini, and he's like got this lifestyle, and I come from the Midwest. They're in Indiana, and every time they relocate her, they're saying, well, it's a very upscale area of Indiana. I'm like, it's Indiana, man. Who cares? But it was very important for them to make these statements when being interviewed, and I just thought, ugh, gross.
It was really gross. And then at the end, speaking of gross, the mother apparently had an online sexual relationship with a man who also is a dwarf. And he claimed at the end of this documentary that, you're hearing about all the accusations the father makes against the mother and how abusive she was to Natalia. But of course, in the first few episodes, he's all, Natalia's possessed, Natalia's evil. And then all of a sudden his story changes. And then it's like, well, Natalia was abused by her. Well, then at the end, it comes out, you never really hear from the mother, but with this man, this male dwarf that the mother had been allegedly communicating with online and had a sexual online relationship with, that man alleges the mother told him that the father had been sexually with Natalia. So you just don't know what to believe. And like I said, at the end, I was worried about the other kids in the house. And I'm worried 100%. That whatever Natalia went through, either way, if she was abused, if she wasn't abused, but she's been through so many homes, if she was left alone, isolated in situations where she didn't have the proper or adequate accommodations that she needed, had health issues. I mean, there's trauma there. So she's going to need some therapy for all that.
And also the way that they just discarded her in that apartment.
Like she was trash.
Like she was trash. And I don't care if the judge said that she was 22. I mean, did they prove that she was a child, or was she not a child?
Her mother, her biological mother from Ukraine, insisted, she doubled down. She said she was born in 2003.
Wow.
So you just don't know. Now, when they compared her, they had that play date with that another girl who suffered from the same type of dwarfism and was allegedly 6 years old too. So when you see them side by side, it was clear Natalia was older than that girl.
Yes.
So that would tend to lead one to believe, okay, she at least is in her teenage years. She's gone through puberty. So, I mean, at earliest, when do girls go through puberty? Puberty at earliest 10, maybe. I think that's very early. Usually it's 12, 13, 14 in that range. So even giving her the benefit of the doubt, let's say it was an early puberty at 12, you still can't leave a 12-year-old to live by themselves in an apartment. So, and certainly not one that has physical disabilities. There weren't. I'm sorry, go ahead.
They didn't have any, there's no ADA accommodation or anything.
Exactly.
It's like they just honestly didn't give a rat's ass about her. And they were angry about, I mean, obviously there's a slew of problems, but even just in the very beginning of the documentary, I'm just thinking to myself, okay, if you are affluent and you're living in Indiana and you have all these possessions and you have this family, what kind of example are you setting for your children when you discard someone? I don't care if she's an adult. She has a disability and you have brought her into your home, and I'm sorry, but I feel like, I'm not a parent, but I feel like you've taken on that responsibility in a way to at least see that she's somehow taken care of because she can't take care of herself. And then just to throw her, and then they made it everyone else's problem. And those people, those neighbors, seemed to be very compassionate towards her, even though they were creeped out. They were also like, we were looking at her, and they would drop off groceries and she's trying to carry them in. I remember seeing a video of her pulling a dumpster, like a little bin for the trash, and then telling the dad, I took the trash out, as if, like, what? I don't understand. I don't understand how any human being can do that.
Well, and I also thought, it was a big issue, at least with the adopted mother, that she was having these bathroom accidents. But to me, I viewed that as a sign of trauma, that this girl or woman, whatever you want to, whatever you believe her age to be, she had been through so much trauma through the relocation of, first being given up for adoption, then in foster care in the Ukraine, then adopted by another American family who kept her for less than a year or so, dropped her off in Florida at this adoption company, washed their hands of her. Then she goes to the Barnetts. They're getting rid of her, dumping her off in an apartment. No wonder the girl's having bathroom accidents or the young woman's having bathroom accidents. To me, that's a sign of trauma.
Absolutely. And let's not forget that they were also shopping her around to different online services and trying to take her. Didn't they take her to a convention to try to pawn her off on a couple that really genuinely felt compassion for her, that were also suffered a similar disability, and were trying to just be compassionate. And it's all very unfortunate. Now, to sort of segue, you said bathroom accidents, and you mentioned Harmony Montgomery.
Same thing.
What's going on?
That is we need to give a trigger warning for that story. It is just
absolutely trigger warning for this.
Trigger warning for that case. For those unfamiliar, Harmony Montgomery was 5 years old, and she went missing in 2019, but her disappearance wasn't discovered by law enforcement and state officials until 2021. So her family, she comes from parents who are no longer together, and her mother lost custody of her in February 2019 due to substance abuse issues. So she went to live with her father, who had a very nomadic lifestyle, married to a woman named Kayla, Harmony's stepmother, and they had, from what I've read, reports are conflicting, but they had either 2 or 3 children themselves. But they had a lot of domestic violence in their family, a lot of financial struggles. They were homeless, living in and out of cars. So even though Harmony was given to the custody of her father, it was a very, very unstable family situation. And law enforcement was called to their home within 10 times within months of Harmony going to live with him. So ultimately, this past week, the probable cause affidavit was released, and her father was charged with her murder last October, 2022. And so we finally got to look at the probable cause affidavit as to what law enforcement has learned. And ultimately, the way they broke this case open is the stepmother flipped on Harmony's father, Adam. And what Kayla, the stepmother, said is that they were homeless, living out of their car in 2019. And Harmony was having bathroom accidents and had 2 or 3 of them. And the father would beat her in the car. And on the 3rd incident in December of 2019, she again had a potty accident. And he was still driving the car, and he turned around and just hit her 3 or 4 times with a closed fist. And after hitting her, they describe it in the probable cause affidavit that she moaned for about 5 minutes, and then the moaning ceased. And when they checked on her, she was not breathing. They didn't render aid. They didn't take her to a hospital. They did nothing to assist her. Father got out of the car, put her body in a duffel bag in the trunk. And then they drove to an apartment complex and parked for 20 minutes. And then they would alternate keeping the body in the trunk and then putting the duffel bag out in the snow so that it would remain cold. And after after so many minutes or so, they discovered, okay, Harmony is really dead. So then they would alternate between the trunk and the snow, with the snow, the purpose of that, to slow decomposition. Within a few days, they go to Kayla's mother's building apartment complex, and they had transferred Harmony's body to a cooler and kept her in a cooler in a communal hallway. And then from there, they moved to a home that was provided for families in transition. And they put her remains in a ceiling vent. And after so many days, the neighbors started complaining about the smell. And so law enforcement has completely torn apart the ceiling and collected it for DNA examination. After they removed her body from the ceiling vents, he then took it to work with him, where he worked at a local restaurant, and put it in the freezer. And so she was there for a few days. And then ultimately, he took her to their new residence and tried to break apart her body in the bathtub with lime.
Oh, my goodness. Oh.
And then he
right.
and the stepmother, I'm sorry. The stepmother put her in another bag. And then he deliberately told the stepmother, I'm not going to tell you where I'm taking her. Well, he rented a U-Haul van and put Harmony in the U-Haul van. And law enforcement was able to track the U-Haul van to a bridge. And so they believe her body was potentially left in this marsh. So he has been charged with her murder, but Harmony has never been found. But back to the bathroom accidents. I believe that girl, I mean, here she is. They're homeless. They're living in a car. There's clearly violence in that family, instability. And, you know, the poor little girl's 5 years old, and she had some bathroom accidents. And every time she has a bathroom accident, her dad beats her. Well, you know, it's a vicious cycle. And she was blind in one eye. She also had a handicap or a disability. And it's just tragic. It's just horrible what happened to that poor girl. So when I heard about the bathroom incidents with Natalia, and then you look at what happened with Harmony, you know, there certainly are parallels there.
Yeah. There was the great state of Ohio had a situation that happened over this last weekend where a father took the lives of his 3 sons.
Yes, I just covered that today.
Execution style. Where did that happen again? I can't. It's not
Claremont
far from where I
County.
Grew up. Where was it?
Yes.
Fairmont County?
Claremont County. Yes. And just horrifying. I mean, right in front of the mother. The daughter ran down the block. One little boy managed to run away, and he basically hunted down that little boy.
Oh, I didn't know that part.
Yes. So so it's sick. And, you know, you think about the trauma, the mother.
He was crying in court, I believe.
He did cry in court.
But they said he just snapped. But yeah, no, back to the trauma that the mother did. Sorry, guys. This has gotten really
It's really
heavy.
Sorry. It's been a bad week for true crime. But you know, they said in the latest court documents I reviewed from the lead prosecutor, they say he premeditated it. He didn't snap, and that he had been planning it for months. But we don't know motive. We don't know. There's no logic to annihilating, becoming a family annihilator and annihilating your children. But in my experience, typically that's anger towards your spouse, that's anger towards your financial situation, that's anger towards something that has nothing at all to do with the children.
That's your professional experience, that when these things happen, that's the cause of it?
There's something else. Yes, it's not the children or anything that children are doing. It's something else that is the trigger, the impetus.
Interesting. Yeah, I just, of course I see Ohio and I'm like, oh, great. Here we are again. And in the news with Ohio. I had almost wondered if there was a drug related sort of thing going on with it too. I hate to.
We haven't heard anything about that. They haven't said anything. In all the descriptions from the first responder that was on scene that, issued the Miranda rights. He apparently was cogent. He asked to have his wallet taken out of his back pocket, and the law enforcement officer that had cuffed him said, look, you have the right to remain silent. Why don't you use it? You know, yeah. I mean, the law, I feel equally as bad for those first responders that, you know, they're not going to be able to get that image out of their minds.
No.
Right.
And I think that's what we often forget about too, is that these people, you know, that are involved in law enforcement that are these first responders or you know, paramedics that come to the scenes of these, even a traffic accident, it's something that they just can't erase from their memory, at least not easily. You know, do you feel in your experience in law enforcement that we're seeing more and more cases like this? Is there an uptick, or are we just becoming more and more aware of them?
I think they're getting more coverage.
Yeah.
I think they're getting more coverage. I mean, there have been murders within families for decades, as you unfortunately know.
Yeah.
And it's just, you know, I think it's a combination of everything. I think it's a combination of more news channels, more online sources, more ways to learn about these incidents. I think there's a true crime fascination. I think there is just a lot of there's a lot of interest in why these things happen.
Sure.
And, you know, certainly we've talked about the fact that it's one thing to talk about these things with a focus on, okay, how can we solve these cases? How can we help the victims? What can we learn from this to prevent this from happening again? And then there are those people that look at this as entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, and I think it often delineates when you involve young children, when people start to go, okay, well, this isn't so entertaining anymore, right? As if that's where you know, where the line of demarcation exists between when a violent crime is entertainment, or whether it's, okay, now we got to take this seriously.
Well, and I can even tell you from my subscribers, because I put out episodes 5 days a week, and I have my diehard subscribers who listen day in and day out, no matter what the case is. And I know in this past week, I covered both Chad Doerman, the man in Ohio who annihilated his 3 sons, and I covered Harmony Montgomery in the probable cause affidavit. And I got comments from my listeners like, Jodi, I love you, but I had to turn it off. I couldn't listen anymore. It was just too much. And I also got that during Lori Vallow Daybell. And I got that during the Murdaugh trial, when it was discussed, you know, how Paul was killed. You know, people just, when it comes to kids, you know, you don't want to hear this. It's horrible. Yeah.
I mean, it's horrible for everyone, for sure. You know, I think and you're a mother, right?
Yes.
And,
yes.
you know, I wonder if a lot of that is because they feel that their future was taken away, and they didn't have a chance. You know, I often wonder about that, you know.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, anytime you have anyone murdered, you know, it's unfair, it's unjust, it's, you know, not lawful, it's not in abidance with any sort of faith in a higher power, you know, treating people well. So that, I think, bothers people at the core. But then when you look at the most vulnerable people, our children, our elderly, our disabled, those are the ones. Like here in Pittsburgh, when we had the massacre at the synagogue, there were a couple brothers there that had disabilities. And, you know, it was just, the whole incident was horrible. And it was the worst act of anti-Semitic violence in American history. But then on top of it, to annihilate, two brothers who were just at the synagogue, just trying to practice their faith and who were disabled. Oh, it's just sick. People just, it really, really, really bothered people.
Well, it terrified, look, I live in Los Angeles. There's a large Jewish community here, especially in sort of around the West Hollywood, Beverly Hills adjacent corridor, of where, they are Hasidic Jews, so very traditional practicing the Jewish faith. And they were terrified. People were terrified of just drive-bys, things of that nature. And
a copycat, right.
And it's really, really disturbing. On a lighter note, now you said you're in Pittsburgh, because I kept telling people I thought you were in Georgia. Good. So Steelers jokes will happen. Not today,
well,
but
good,
at some
because
point.
I'm a cheesehead. I'm a Packer fan. But I am raising two Steeler fans. So yes, I'm in Pittsburgh.
I say that as someone who grew up in Ohio, but did not root for the Browns either. So, yeah, it's interesting. And let me ask you something, just for those that don't know, because I'm a little bit ignorant on this, because there's been a lot of, I believe, wasn't the Delphi, the killer for the Richard, what is his name?
Richard Allen. We have to
Richard Allen, or sorry, not the killer, but I'm sorry, the person the accused killer. There was a probable. What is a probable cause affidavit, and why is that so important? And why do people want to know what's in that? What is contained in that? Because it was the same thing with the Kohberger, with Brian Kohberger in the Idaho 4 case. There's a lot of talk about that, but I guess I'm curious if I get some clarity around what exactly that means.
Sure. That typically is your document that contains all the probable cause to arrest this person or to charge this person. Okay. So let's say in the case of Kohberger or Richard Allen, law enforcement knew this is our guy. This is the person. We have enough evidence now. We have enough probable cause to go to a judge and say, we need a warrant to arrest this person. And so then they go to the judge, they write up under oath the probable cause affidavit, and it lays out the facts of the investigation, not in totality. It doesn't have to contain every known fact to them, just enough that they have probable cause that this is the person that they believe committed this crime. And then the judge either agrees or disagrees. And if the judge agrees, they issue the warrants, and then law enforcement can arrest that person. And then that person is brought into court for an arraignment where the charges are read to them, they're explained to them, and then that person can enter a plea. And then typically they're entitled to a preliminary hearing. Now, what law enforcement can do is to avoid the preliminary hearing, like in the case of Kohberger, they can go to a grand jury and obtain a grand jury indictment. And a grand jury indictment is secret. It's a secret proceeding, and the defense doesn't get to be there. So basically, the prosecutors just go before a grand jury, which is an impaneled group of citizens, and they present the evidence, and then the grand jury decides, yes, we agree. This person should be charged in this case.
And that's what happened in the case of my father, because there was a grand jury, and I don't remember ever hearing about a probable cause affidavit, but I was definitely present for the grand jury, because
I think it'd be very interesting, Collier, to get your court documents.
Yes, that is something that I'm looking into, but it costs money to get those. But I bet you David Messmore
would be able to help you with that.
I should look at you knowing the names. You watched the doc. You showed me notes. We're gonna have to talk about.
Yes.
I don't know if we'll get to that today or another time, but we're gonna have to talk about that. But yeah, it's very interesting to me. So thank you for explaining that, because I was reading this and I'm going, I don't really understand what this probable cause affidavit. People were very anticipatory of it. Now, are those types of things? Is there a way that they can keep those under seal?
Yes, they can. Like, for example, Harmony Montgomery's probable cause affidavit was kept under seal until just this past week. The Kohberger probable cause affidavit was kept under seal until he arrived back in Idaho. We did see in the Richard Allen case, right now, we've got documents under seal that the judge is supposed to unseal this week as far as what evidence the prosecution has and different pretrial motions. And everybody's just chomping at the bit to get a look at those documents because we want to see the strength of the prosecution case against Richard Allen for the murders of Liberty German and Abby Williams in Delphi, Indiana.
Yeah, and it took, Tara Newell and I had interviewed Kelsey German, Liberty's sister, older sister, on our Survivor Squad podcast a few weeks ago, and sort of, discussed with her, 5 years it took to find this suspect. What do you say to people that are, oftentimes, and obviously I had you on and we released the episode, and there are many opinions about law enforcement and law enforcement's policies and procedures, and whether or not they're doing their job effectively in the court of public opinion. But what goes into something? How does law enforcement, I guess, quote, justify, for lack of a better word, taking 5 years to find a suspect? And is that necessarily, I mean, people look at that and go, that's a bad thing. But I think that people don't understand the complexities that go into building a case.
You get one shot.
That's what I'm asking. That one shot.
That's right. And oftentimes I would remind people that you could have an entire fleet of agents or detectives or police officers who are like, this is our guy or this is our girl and they did it and we got them and, pull the trigger. And it's the prosecutors. It's the prosecutors who are the ones who make the decision that say, look, I don't have enough evidence here. This could be a hiccup in front of a panel, a jury panel. It only takes one juror. So if there is reasonable doubt or something that the prosecutor doesn't feel strong enough, if you pull the trigger and indict someone and go to trial and they're found not guilty, you can't charge them again.
Yes.
So that's the fear. That's the fear. So, I know it was frustrating, especially in Delphi, Indiana, because law enforcement knew he was on that trail. They knew that back in 2017. They had that image of that person in that coat. And from what we're hearing, the wife knew he had that coat. His voice was on that tape. He worked in that community. It's a small town. I have a feeling people were calling in about him. But people calling in isn't enough to arrest people. You have to have evidence of it. And, I think the big thing we're waiting for with these documents to be unsealed is, okay, if you collected these ballistics, you found that unspent round near one of the bodies of one of the victims, why did it take you so long to get a search warrant for his property and match up that round having been expelled from his weapon? That's the connection everybody's wondering about. Why did it take so long? And we won't know until things are unsealed, and maybe not until January 8th when his trial starts.
Got it. So there was a firearm involved in that?
That's the link. That's the biggest link. And that is what the defense is challenging. They found an unspent bullet, and they were able to find through the tool markings on that unspent bullet that it allegedly matches or it came from his 6-hour weapon that he had. And given in an interview, he stated to law enforcement, as I believe his wife did, that he is the only one that has access to that weapon. So
that's an expensive weapon too. A 6 hours is an expensive weapon.
Yeah, that's my first weapon, service weapon.
Well, that's issued. That's issued, right?
Yeah.
That's issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It still goes to just completely dumbfound me that people who perpetrate these crimes think they're going to get away with it nowadays. I mean, those girls were on Snapchat apparently, and that when you can trace things, I mean, 30 years ago, you could trace around based upon markings in a barrel of a weapon, right? Nowadays, like how do you
Well,
think that
I
people
can
just
tell
don't
you.
care? Yeah.
Well, no, I think I can tell you with teenagers, and I think this with the Ohio case as well. I know, having 2 teenagers myself, they're on Snapchat constantly. So
Yeah.
I'm not surprised that Liberty and Abby Snapchatted and snapped him. The kids, teenagers do that with that. So that was very smart, but it's also very instinctual for teenagers to do that.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised, given the geolocation data that's available on Snapchat. I mean, kids, college students, anyone can go on Snapchat and you can see where everybody is if they have their geolocator on. So,
really?
yes. And so I'm very curious, given these search warrants that went out to Snapchat in the Idaho case, if law enforcement has made a connection between Brian Koberger and one or more of the victims.
And is that in the probable cause document?
No, it is not. But we know through other documents that they have sealed and in some cases redacted that there have been search warrants that have gone out to Snapchat. But back to your point, Collier, as far as committing the perfect crime in this day and age, I think it's very difficult with DNA. I think it's very difficult with technology and geo-tracking data and geofencing warrants, where you can determine, if you're law enforcement, what cell phones are in this area, what apps are in this area or used that can track you. Vehicles have that data. I mean, there's cameras everywhere. We have Amazon trucks and UPS trucks everywhere with cameras. I mean, it's very, very difficult to get away with the perfect crime.
Yeah, it makes me. I often think about this in the. I think ethics is probably the wrong word, but sort of the decision. Like I feel like you have to be on a mission of self-destruction yourself to commit something like this, because you can't get away with it in this day. I mean, I don't think you can. There's just too much. I mean, look, I also live in a major metropolitan area where there's cameras everywhere. I mean, literally, I told my friend the other day, they were visiting Beverly Hills, and I said, you better not smoke a cigarette, because they smoked. I said, you better not smoke a cigarette there. And they looked at me and they're like, why? And I said, because they have cameras and they'll write you a ticket for that. And they go, well, but I'll be in my car. I'm like, especially in your car. It's illegal to smoke in the city of Beverly Hills, and they will issue you a ticket, and it's like $500, you know?
Well, I'll tell you, now we only know about the DNA that was found in the knife sheath in Idaho, and the knife sheath was left behind. But there may be quite a bit of other DNA. We just don't know yet. But certainly, had they not had that knife sheath with the DNA, I mean, that was their big clue. That's what they used to get onto Koberger. It was certainly helped once they found out about the Elantra, and they got the tip from Washington State University, from the cop there, that, hey, I found this Brian Koberger, he's got this Elantra. That helped, but certainly that DNA from that knife sheath was huge. Had they not had that, I don't think we would have had an arrest as quickly as we did.
Yeah, and I often wonder too, you know, and I've discussed this with other people that are sort of familiar and they understand, you know, people being harassed or being digitally pursued, if you will, for lack of a better word, or stalked, that there might have been some navigations of parasocial relationships that went awry in this particular case, that maybe the perpetrator had relationships or was following the victims online.
Well, with their knowledge or without, we don't know.
Yeah.
You know, that's it. You know, I mean, certainly, you know, you can come across someone online and become fascinated. There are people that has happened to. I'm sure you know.
Yes, I do.
So,
yes, I do.
Yes. So, you know, and I mean, not to laugh at it, because it can be quite serious when people are stalking. And of course, we don't have any indication that any of these victims in Idaho had any idea that, there were 12 drive-bys, prior to November 13th.
Yeah. Is that what it was?
It was, well, we know from the probable cause affidavit that his phone pinged in the location of the crime scene at least 12 times prior.
Wow. So he was staking it out.
He had an app. He had an exercise app, Strava, I believe it's called, that gives you.
I have that too.
Okay. That gives geolocation data. And so one of the things, they want to look at is, okay, where were you? Where were you? And certainly that will pinpoint when he was in close proximity to 1122 King Road.
It's interesting that you mentioned Strava because they're a whole other and a much more benign and friendlier case to discuss. I'm an avid mountain biker, and I use Strava because I go up in the mountains that are right behind me, over the hills and whatever it is, Brentwood and the Palisades. And I go with my friends, and one of the things that Strava had released was last year, the year before, is you can take the app and you can, because what was happening is people were using the app. So you put in your bike because you've got all your metrics, and that's what makes these apps so cool. And they connect to the watch and the Garmin and everything. But you put in the type of bike you own. So if you know that they own X bike that's worth $15,000, because mountain bikes are not cheap, people were using the app to track the people to find out where they lived, so they could, they were running their cars into people's houses to break open the garage to steal all the bikes, because like 50 grand worth of bikes. They can just heist them in a second. So there was people that were using Strava to commit crimes in that way, to steal people's equipment.
Unreal. I also heard you can use it basically for social networking. Like you can set yourself up to, I'm a biker or I'm a hiker, and meet people that way.
100%. I mean, I'm sure you could use it as a dating app, because it does connect to, at least, I know it at least connects to Facebook. I don't normally post stuff, but it'll automatically, if I'm done swimming, I'll hit the button and it'll automatically post it to Strava. And then my friends will be like, oh, I like that. Or they give you kudos, is what they give you on, so people can follow your activities. And it's interesting. I've interviewed some other people on the program that specialize in this type of thing, and sometimes I don't like talking to them because it's like, okay, I just won't go outside and talk to people. But it's navigating those parasocial relationships. What do you think? What do you think with the rise in all of this is a way, and I know we discussed this before, we were talking about like Ring cameras and things like that, but ways that people are protecting themselves. But again, when you look at these cases and how people can be tracked, I mean, are we safe? I mean, you're in law enforcement. I mean, or we're in law enforcement. Like,
I get asked that question all the time, especially from my listeners. Like, Jodi, what can I do to protect myself? I recently got a lot of questions from women in the Portland area after the story of the 6 women came out.
And what's happening with that, by the way? I talked about that a little bit, but give me an update. This is the true crime update.
Yes, the true crime update is that law enforcement, because these women were from basically the Portland Metroplex area, but were found within 100 miles of each other, law enforcement from the various jurisdictions, the various counties and police departments were talking to each other to see if they had similarities between or amongst the victims. However, once that was announced that they're talking to each other, people kind of took that and ran with it and said, oh, there must be a serial killer. And so law enforcement had to back that up and say, wait a minute, we're talking to each other to be proactive, but right now we don't have anything definitive to say that these victims are in fact linked and that we have one perpetrator. In fact, only one victim, as of to my knowledge, has actually been confirmed to be a homicide to date. Now, since that initial announcement, it's my understanding that 3 victims do have some commonalities in that they had some sort of substance abuse issue going on, a history of on and off substance abuse. Some of them had been homeless for a time, and that 2 of them had been childhood friends in elementary school. So when you look at that fact, it's highly unusual that given the population in a large metropolitan area like Portland, to have 2 victims within such a short amount of time or such a short time span in such close proximity be found dead in similar areas, rural areas, wooded areas, and have physical characteristics that are similar in nature. Many of them are brunettes, same size, height. That's concerning. It's concerning. But back to your question about safety, many of my listeners were asking, what do we do? And so the number one thing I would say is we all carry cell phones. Have an app, have a Life 360 app or some sort of similar thing where your family, your close friends, your intimate partners, they can keep track of where your location is and where you are. And that way, if you don't show up, we can see where were you, that sort of thing. That's number one, a great, great device that if you have a cell phone, it doesn't cost you really any money. You can do that app for free. And certainly when you have children going to colleges, I know a lot of 18-year-olds are like, okay, mom and dad, see you later. Bye. I don't want you tracking me and where I'm going at, whatever time of night or where I'm staying for the night. At least have your college-age children have their friends, be in a friend circle with one of those apps so their friends can track them so that they know where they are, someone that they trust, so that there is some sort of technological breadcrumb trail, so to speak. It's also a good idea for women, have mace, have a whistle, have one of those alarms, panic alarms. All those kinds of things are just, relatively inexpensive, but are good safety measures, especially if you do hike or you walk on trails in remote areas, things like that.
Yeah. Another thing I got to ask you, because there was a lot of comments in the video. I have a very good friend of mine who still is employed by the U.S. government, and he was former FBI. He now works for DHS. He's been there for well over 10 years. But we sometimes will discuss conspiracy theories. And he says to me, we don't discuss them, but he says something that I always go back to, which is, he says, Collier, the notion of a conspiracy is predicated on the fact that the person who's committing and creating such conspiracy actually knows what they're doing. And he said, in terms of the United States government, they can't even get my paycheck right. Or as you so pointed out, they can't even fix the copy machine.
The copy machines are down a lot in the government. I will say that. Yeah. There's no shortage of conspiracy theories.
And you were telling me when you were at the Pentagon right after 9/11, you were picking up debris of airplanes.
Yes. That, quite frankly, that I think is one of the most sickening conspiracy theories to all the people, all the victims who perished, not only in the Pentagon, but on the plane that hit the Pentagon. It's insulting to all the family members of those individuals. It's insulting to all the law enforcement that have lost their lives due to the toxins that they inhaled at the Pentagon. All the responders. We picked up plane pieces for days, amongst other things there. So I really don't have any patience, quite frankly, for that conspiracy theory in particular, just because I know what I did for 16 days, and I definitely picked up pieces of a plane.
Yeah, it is. I was filming in New York City, probably like 2017, 2018, and I was in Little Italy, and I went past this fire station. Mm-hmm. They just happened to have the door open. It was probably like 9, 10 o'clock at night, and it was they were first responders at the first tower.
Mm-hmm. Well, sure, that's right up the road from the Trade Center.
Precisely, exactly.
Right.
And they just I'm getting misty thinking about it. It just was something that you just kind of stand there. And I was with this producer and I said, hey, and just like, we just had this moment of like, they lost like 12 guys in their battalion.
Yes, if I would encourage anyone, if you have the opportunity to go to New York City, go to the 9/11 Museum. It is, it's really a wonderfully done, and really, really honors all the brave men and women, not only in law enforcement, but also just the citizens that helped, complete strangers on that horrible day. And as well as here in Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half from where I live is the Flight 93 Memorial. And that is a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful museum as well, to the heroics of the passengers on Flight 93 and what they did to really save people on the ground in Washington, D.C. I mean, they took control of that plane. And, I think sometimes their story gets lost. Sure. And, the whole, there were a lot of heroes that day, a lot of heroes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you for clarifying that. And I did want to do that because I did want to address those comments because I just thought, oh man, come on. Like,
yes. In fact, I can tell you, I definitely picked up pieces of a plane, and I can tell you the interior of the plane, when you strip away the sides that go around the windows and everything, when you get that taken off, the inside of the plane was green. I'll even tell you that because we picked up just pieces for 2 weeks. So.
Yeah, which, and I was talking about this yesterday. I was thinking about the submarine that went missing, and
that's a tragedy.
It really is. It's just, and I get it. And a lot of people think, oh, these people spent money and an exorbitant amount of money to participate in this. But, look, there were people that got into boats, hundreds of years ago that didn't even know if those things were going to work because they thought that they could get spices from the other side of this, whatever this vast ocean was, and there was a better life there. So the foundation of human existence is exploration and curiosity and wanting to explore the unknown. And I get it, and maybe they should have left it alone. Sure, there's plenty of stuff, but they didn't ask for this,
Well, it's just sad all the way around. It really is. There's going to be a lot of questions, even I found it interesting watching my teenagers because I have two 16-year-old twins. And I was talking with my daughter and she's like, Mom, I don't understand. It's not like they could look out a window and see the Titanic. It's not that they could get out and, scuba dive down there at that level.
Yeah.
And, she was like, well, the vessel would have had to spin and the pressure. And, she's talking to me about it scientifically.
Uh-huh.
And I was thinking like, oh, well, that's fascinating. But she's like, why go down there if they could have sent, an unmanned device or machine
Sure.
that could just get the video. She's like, if they're going down there in that capsule or submersible and just looking at a screen anyways, why do they have to go down there? And I think that's kind of the question everyone has. Why did you have to go down there?
Yeah. I was actually surprised when I saw the photographs of it because I thought it had windows or something. I mean, ignorantly, like, Why would it have windows? It's going 13,000 feet below the surface of the ocean. It would, just crush. But I think that I was, I think we're all wondering the same question that, while we, wouldn't have maybe made the same choice, but thinking of exactly, there's so much that could have been done remotely.
Right. And I understand from the, the planet resource energy component of what we can learn by studying the bottom of the ocean. I understand the valid argument for that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if necessarily that's what this was. I think this was kind of a voyage to look at, a place that was a grave for many
Yeah.
people that died. So I don't know. It just sad all the way around.
It's sad all the way around. I did, also on the flip side, I saw that one of the passengers was a 77-year-old French explorer who was known as like Mr. Titanic or something, or this was like his life's work. Kind of part of me was thinking, well, now you've, maybe,
Now you know.
maybe he was the person that was probably sitting there at that moment saying, I'm going where I want to be, maybe, perhaps. I don't know, Maybe he thought he was going home. I don't know. Maybe that's me.
Well, and maybe they didn't even know what happened. Maybe it was so
what
fast.
I'm really hoping. It's just like that. Boom.
Because, and that is a conversation I had with my daughter. I said, look, when the Space Shuttle Challenger blew up,
100%.
That's what I thought of. Like, what if it wasn't instantaneous? So, I
watched that live. I don't know about you.
Oh, I was a sophomore in high school. Yeah. In fact, my friend, I remember when I was at lunch and my friend Troy, who's actually a stuntman out in Hollywood, and I'll have to introduce you because he's in a ton of movies. He is the one that told me, he's like, Jodi, I just heard the Challenger blew up. I'm like, what? And sure enough, we went to American History the night right after lunch period, and they made an announcement.
Yeah, it was something else. It was
Definitely.
something else. And a collective trauma.
Oh,
right
yes. And then, of course, it happened again with, was it Columbia, I believe?
Yeah, it was Columbia.
Yeah. So, these kinds of things, we learn so much through exploration and, certainly risk. There is incredible risk. But, humans are not perfect and technology isn't perfect. And so, that's the thing we always have to remember at the end of the day, is that no matter how many great minds you put together and no matter how sophisticated the machinery or I don't know if the PlayStation controller is considered sophisticated, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, things can go wrong. No matter all the planning you put in, things can go wrong.
I mean, look, I get that white people are like, it's a $30 controller. Look, I used to do Odyssey of the Mind, when I was in high school and even when I was in grade school. Mm-hmm. And we would build robots and we would build stuff to do. I mean, obviously, it's a little bit different than it is nowadays. Right. But you don't need. It's actually something like that is so simply designed that that's exactly what you need, because there's not a lot to fail. Right. I mean, we still have airplanes that, yes, they have sophisticated aeronautical, systems and wind speed and all of that. But the concept of the airplane is still two wings with ailerons and a tail. It has not fundamentally changed other than the software that guides it and the systems to understand wind speed and weather patterns. The concept is still the same. It's like the wheel. Like the wheel is very simple, but it still works. So, I mean, to that, it's like, if it had cost $100 at Best Buy, would that have been a better choice? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
If the batteries went dead, would that have been, if it needed I mean, there's a lot of things, but again, it's an unfortunate loss of life, and it's unfortunate, I think, for all of the people who they are hoping that their participation would lead to a different outcome.
Well, and not to be insensitive, but people are like, well, what were the knocking noises then? There were these knocking noises every half hour that they've reported they were hearing for the last 2 days or so. What's that? Are we going to find out what that was? Because, what were they hearing? I think that's something too that people are asking about.
I wonder if people because there are scientists that came out and said, well, it could be anything. It could be a whale. It could be this. It could be that. Like, the knocking noises might have nothing to do with this at all.
And maybe it didn't.
And I think that's one of the things, I did a TED Talk about this, when it comes to traumatic events, we first of all, we try to wrap our heads around it with why did this happen? And then we look to, what we almost look to someone to blame or something to grab onto, right? That,
And
they
I
should
said
have heard
this
this.
to you, and I said this to you after watching your documentary, that sometimes we try to apply logic to illogical situations.
Yeah.
And I remember watching you trying so hard to talk to your dad. And I'm like, okay, you're trying to apply logic to an illogical person. And you say to him, I'm a logical person. And that's what we do. We try to apply logic to things and, have reason and a meaning and just tell me why. And sometimes we don't get the answer to why.
I did say that. I remember that. I'm a logical person.
I literally was like, okay, Collier, you're trying to apply logic to an illogical situation. And then you literally came out and said it. So, it was very evident.
We got to bring you back to always give us our true crime updates, but also to we got to discuss the film because you have 2 or 3 pages of questions that we should go through.
I have about 10 pages, but yes.
10 pages. Fantastic. We will do that another time. So, Jodi Weber, where can my audience find you?
You can find me on patreon.com. My podcast is called Caught in My Web.
Very, very simple. It is a podcast. It is on Patreon. My guest today is Jodi Weber, and she's fantastic. Former journalist, former FBI agent. Thank you for joining the program. Oh, you're most certainly welcome. Thank you, Jodi.
Thanks.
I want to say thank you to all my, excuse me. I want to say thank you to all my channel members, all my Patreon subscribers, all my channel members here on YouTube, all my subscribers, all of you who have come, super stickers, super chatters. Thank you all so much for joining the program. I'm grateful. Your support helps make this possible. Check out merchandise if you're interested. And if you're interested in my film, A Murder in Mansfield, is also available in my store, which is down below here in the links, or you can go to my website, collierlandry.com, to check out all of that. For now, I'm Collier Landry, and this is a live episode of Moving Past Trauma. I'll see y'all. This podcast is made possible by support from listeners just like you. For exclusive content around this podcast, please consider supporting me via Patreon by going to collierlandry.com/support. Please subscribe via Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts from, and please leave us a 5-star review. If you want to see video episodes of this podcast, please check out my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Collier Landry. You can find links to additional resources in the show notes of today's episode. This podcast is a production of Don't Touch My Radio. Copyright Collier Landry.